Munro, who says he's going to write a booklet about this.
And
so
postulate.
Don't cross your fingers, but it might happen. But Revell, who knows heaps about the history of all of the mining stuff in the North East. Revell. Jeff Jennings. Oh, Jeff, turn that friggin' thing off, would you?
You want to just work it up?
Jeff Jennings, who?
This is my right arm.
I don't know, I'm not putting on, I didn't even know about that. No,
It'll be on YouTube.
Who has, in the same boat as Michael Douglas, probably brought school children here for yonks. David Atkinson, a new member who's going to bring school children here, who's the outdoor ed man, new person over here. Let me see. Oh, Gary. Gary is a local historian as well, and has written, I haven't actually read all his books, but he's written books, and especially I want to get hold of the one about the blue tear.
Over the hill.
Over the hill. Gary's over the hill.
I ride over the hill.
Everybody got lunch? It could get, what, about 45, how long in there? 45 minutes? 40? Half an hour? Don't know. As long as
so best let it go.
We've done well to be half 10 here, actually, setting off.
You could hear it from Gladstone.
Well, I was here in 71 and I was out here at the Scotia Lead.
Oh, right.
Drilling here in 71 and it was just over there, probably just getting ready to tie up. Yeah. And I never saw it, never heard it, and didn't even know it, except a little sign said Dorset Dredge, you know, a little metal one there.
Yeah, that's right.
Didn't even know it was down here then.
What was that other
so
talk
Jeff,
you were going to say to Revell
Whitmore has got another interview with his father, I think through you and kids, that wasn't on that little...
All right.
Hello, I'm not going to crow and...
Maybe they were just checking it.
Job cutting the track.
Yeah. Seen plenty of those in the last few days, haven't we?
In fact, he looked after it when the fellow went away.
Yeah.
Look out for the leeches. They've found Rex. He's very sweet.
Oh wow, we're here.
Yep. Yeah, this is a bit of a sad sight. Virtually upside down.
That was an absolutely beautiful video of it. It was like a leviathan.
Yeah. Well, it was actually, when it was working, it actually was a registered ship. You had to have a captain, yeah.
For heaven's sake.
Because it actually, you know, was floating. Yeah. No, they've taken just about all the superstructure off. Only the framework's really left.
Up to it, if you go around the other way, you can see a big cable and you put it onto it.
So when this was working, it was working its way through there, was it?
Yeah.
Is that what it was sticking out?
Yeah, that's where it would have. Then they But I don't think it was used for a few years.
No, it was parked here.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
They just parked it here.
I just see that tree and I thought it might have been working its way.
It were assembled from local timber. Right. Yeah. I mean, the boilers and things would come in, but yeah, no, they were constructed out of timber.
Didn't some of the gear for this come from Red Hills in Victoria in 1941?
The dredge did.
Yeah.
Basically, the dredge came from Red Hills, Red Bank.
Red Bank.
41 was it?
No, actually, it's about 42, but
Yeah.
and it was built in 43, 44, with Malaysia captured the tin producing countries there, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. The Commonwealth thought it was necessary to get a bit more production ourselves. So there was a gold dredge in Victoria.
Right.
And so it was shipped over and reassembled there at South Mount Cameron.
Oh no, the buckets are all full. They just spare one. No, a bloke was actually fired for that.
Now we need a coffee.
Okay, Revell,
Yep.
the floor's all yours.
Right, what a huge subject for what a huge beast. Yes. It's quite a long time since I've been here. Right, but I guess my knowledge comes from actually working with a mining company in the 80s that actually owned the dredge at that time. I suppose we better go back. The word Dorset is the council, the Dorset Dredge, and to make it more confusing, this dredge, since it arrived in Tasmania after being pulled apart and reassembled in 1943, has been in 3 places, all also called Dorset. So it was, when it arrived from Victoria in pieces, it was assembled at South Mount Cameron, or a little bit closer to Pioneer, on what's called Dorset Flats, and that's a very wide expanse in the Ringarooma River of mineable river sediments, and so it was built there, and that's called Dorset Flats, and it worked there, owned by the Commonwealth Government from 45 it was actually working right through to about 1962. It was owned by the Commonwealth Government, and in all but 1 year it made a profit. And it was very tightly run with a good fellow called H.J. Turner, and it worked brilliantly there. Much to the most government things were generally loss-making, but this proved a point. So it worked there at those flats for many years, and then towards the end it went upstream behind at South Mount Cameron and became Dorset Extended. And at the end of Dorset Extended, about 1963, it had mined all that was there, and it was decided that we've got to find some more places to dredge. So the dredging companies, by then it had actually changed hands and the government had sold it. So I've even got the tender document there for the Commonwealth. So I've got a few things behind me selling it, and it was sold to the Stories Creek Tin Mining Company. Does anyone know that company, that name? Is that the ring of
Down
a
from
bell?
in the Fingal Valley.
So Stories Creek is up here, the tin mine there,
Right.
and that became part of the Aberfoyle group. And that group, a few years later, around the 80s, was quite a big national group. So it was sold to the Stories Creek Tin Mining Company, and even I've got somewhere of how many £1,000 it went for, but £44,500 it was sold for, around about 1962. So by the time it came down here, and this was called New Dorset. So we had Dorset Extended, Dorset Flats, and the Dorset Dredge came to New Dorset, and it had to be pulled apart there. And if quite a lot of you people have already been and seen the old pontoon that's tucked in by the river bank, that was the base of this dredge when it was back those other 2 places. So Phoenix Foundry, Launceston, won the contract to build the new pontoon. So this is only 1963, so it's relatively new steel there. And the reason they had to rebuild it was that down there at the Dorset Flats and the Dorset Extended, could only dig with the bucket ladder. We haven't even talked about how dredges work, to 30 feet. That was 30 feet ground. Tin's generally on the bottom, often in these things, you've got to get to clean the bottom out. But here it was 50 feet ground. So they had to extend it quite considerably, which meant you can't just stick a great heavy bucket ladder and extend it that much. They had to build a whole new pontoon. So there was a 200, it cost about £250,000 to build and reconstruct here, of which the government lent, I don't know if they ever paid back, £220,000, and it took quite a couple of years to get it there and reassemble it. A bit further down that where we left the cars, the road goes on, and that's where they'd moved their offices, the workshops, the tin shed for cleaning the tin and stuff. So they had a complex down there by 1963, 64, and that was where it was built. And yeah, it took a year or two to build, but so, and it worked. So I actually did a...
When they build it on the ground and then just sluice the water?
Yes, yeah, you'd build it on the ground and then you'd use sluicing and it would sink into a hole. And the way and it could start digging its way a bit too, of course.
Yeah, I thought that's how they would do it.
So I did a report on its for years for the mining company a fair few years ago with experience here, and it was a mixed experience. So they proved up great reserves of 20 million cubic metres at such a grade of tin and a little bit of gold, but it never quite achieved to it. And so it had a, if you're a Gladstoneite at all, you're often talking about the mine manager Sackham Jack. So it had a fairly vexed sort of, we're talking in the 60s, right up to 1970, 71 when it finished. And for 1 minute it was going to be closed down, and there was gloom and doom within the township of Gladstone, etc. People were going to be paid off. And then they got onto a good little bit of it, and they suddenly got $50,000 dollars worth of tin then, and there was a stay of execution. But probably by the late 1970s, and I've got all sorts of things I could read about it. You know, July '69, resignation of A.E. Thomas, Sackham Jack, replaced by Vick Whitmore.
We were lucky to interview Mr. Vick Whitmore, who was the manager of the Dorset Dredge when it was shut down in 1971.
So it must have been pretty hard living around here with the mining.
It was all weather. Alluvial mining was all weather. You had to, no matter whether it was hard rain or snow, a miner had to be out in the weather. Yeah. And it was all pretty tough going. Yeah. And we had a big flood, and that lifted the dredge up, say, probably 10 feet. Well, when the flood water went down again, this side the dredge was sitting on the bank. So as the flood waters went down, the dredge tilted, and that's how it came to stop, sitting on the bottom on that side and on the bank on this side.
So how deep would that water be?
The water in there would be about 10 to 12 feet now. When we dredged in there, we dredged the hole in at 12 feet, so it wouldn't be any more than 12 feet.
Yeah. Is this lake here actually, was it here in the first place?
No, the dredge had to dredge into it. As the dredge worked, it made its own hole. Actually, it took the dirt from in front of it and put it behind, and it had a hole floating so as the dredge could float all the time. The dredge had to be floating all the time to work.
And in late '69, dredge affected by flood. The bucket ladder, which we've just seen, was sanded in 39 feet below the water level when the power supply failed. Oh. So these are problems when you're dredging, because it was an electric dredge. So you had to keep the lines going to supply, move your transformers, and they floated a cable out on 44-gallon drums behind it. So you always, it's like vacuuming with an extension cord, you always had to watch that side as well. And if the power went off and the ladder happened to be right down, digging deep stuff at that 50 feet, and then all the sand came from filled in around it, it trapped it solid. And I think I just...
Did the power station have anything to do with the power for this?
Well, it was state grid. Marina really wasn't, no. Marina was supplying endurance. Yeah. And yeah, probably about then. So the diversion dam was built around it when it sanded in. The bucket ladder was freed with the aid of a drag line. The cost of this mishap, $20,000 dollars in those days, 7 operating weeks lost. So in 71 there was notification to the Department of Mines that the operations are going to cease and the dredge was going to be put on a care and maintenance program, and because they didn't really find any more payable tin ahead. So what it did is it generally worked downstream from here, because the Ringarooma River we haven't seen is just right by, and so it never worked this area. It worked what was called the black duck, the canary, the aberfoyle, so lots of old existing mines. It worked down there, and it basically came up here to park, so they lifted the bucket ladder up and only took a little bit of depth, so they did it really quickly and parked it here. And this was a natural little backwater.
Is this little backwater river actually got a name?
No, the creek that comes in doesn't seem to have a name.
I thought it was called Black Duck Dam.
Black Duck Lagoon was an area where they set it up down where the mine workshops are.
Oh, okay.
I have got a map here with all these mining places, existing mines, and they were gravel pit mines and sluicing. They weren't dredging mines.
Are there still workshops here?
No, they were sold in '82 with the big Greys auctions came to Tasmania. So it was all sold in '82 when things were finished. But I don't know what. It's a bit unclear what happened to the dredge. The company I worked for there owned it. I don't know whether it was listed for sale or not. But about then, when I brought quite a lot of people down here as visitors, and it was always going to get going, and but fortunately never did. And the mining company at Pioneer I worked for often was a bit short of equipment, so they would, on the other bank, they'd come down and pull a pump out, or they actually removed the jig plants which were used for concentrating, and so they started to pinch things, and then other people started to pinch things, and then it started to list a little bit, but it was still great to walk on. And then when the mines closed after that, all the auctions, basically tin mining was dead. It became what it should have reverted to this crown, because some stage the mining lease that was around it dropped, but whether it did, but then scrappies started pulling pieces off more, and they could only get to one side, and this is the side they've pulled it all from. That was all clad with corrugated iron, but it fits there, and of course it became unstable. The 1988 floods, because it was this is not a very deep lagoon, so it was almost touching the bottom. The floods came up and it just went on its side, woomph, because half of it gone on one side and the rest, all the structure was still existing, so it was mighty unbalanced. And so after the 88 floods in August, about the 4th, probably the biggest floods we've had. We haven't had any bigger, I don't think, since. That's what did to it.
Okay, so how did you first get involved with the dredge?
Well, I can't actually remember. I know Triaco Resources were the owner of the dredge at that time, and somehow or another we came to an agreement that we got rid of the scrap and we got 50% of what we got for the scrap.
So what kind of things did you actually get off the dredge at that stage?
Very little. Most of it, because we started at Pioneer, and we took all the scrap that belonged to them from there, a little bit around the back of the Blue Lake, and then the dredge, bits and pieces, because there was electric cables there as thick as my arm that used to drag through the bush coming from their own generating plant. And but other than that, there was 2 buckets. They weren't actually on the dredge, they were spare ones. One ended up as a barbecue at our house at Port Hills, and the other one ended up at the Derby Tin Mine Centre, which we donated to them. We actually got a free lunch for that. Had some stuff that we thought was stolen, a couple of tin jigs, if anybody knows what they are, and tracked them all down through the local people at Pioneer who told me who'd got them.
Yeah.
So yes, it was very interesting in that respect, and found them over on the west coast, and then spoke to the people, and they said no, we bought them off Triaco. That they were in the deal when we took it on, and we spoke to Triaco and said, oh yes, sorry, we forgot to tell you that, and they came up with their half of what they sold them for, so that was the deal. So
fair enough.
They were good to deal with in that respect. Yeah. This one here is very similar to what the dredge was when we went to it. And
so was it leaning over like that when you first got
it was leaning over like that, and we spent a lot of time pumping that when it got low enough, and in the top photo here you see the water probably still running into it, but when the dam went down a bit further, we pumped all the water out of it so that when and put it into the topside tanks, and the water came up again, it stood up, not to dead level, but it was reasonably level.
So that must have been before the big flood of 1988.
Yes, yes.
Because that was the one that did a lot of
That's one
damage.
that did right. We got an invitation to go to a meeting at Derby at a Hazy's Hope pub, and there was quite a lot of interest there. And the school was onto us. Don't wreck it. You know, it's too much interest. You know, historical. So we approached Triaco and said, you know, there's great interest to keep it, which they said, well, basically all they wanted was to be shot of it, so that they weren't liable for if anybody got on that, as it was there now, it would be quite easy to fall off, as it looks in this photo. No, there was a lot of steel in it, and we had high hopes to make a quid out of it, but with the interest of the public, we said, well, we're prepared to sign it over. Triaco done the same thing, and I didn't tell them because it was up straighter than what these photos indicate now, and I said, you know, you'll have to keep the water pumped to balance it, because they'd taken, somebody, I don't know, it was prior to us anyway, had taken the jigs off one side. You can see the big hole in the photo in there. Well, that's where the jigs were.
Oh, right.
Each jig probably weighs, I don't know, a couple of tonne, I might be wrong.
So that would have unbalanced it or something?
And that unbalanced it. And then with the water coming in, got it over and to a degree where you can see there where the water was running into it. And so we said to them, you've got to keep the balance right, so you've got to have a pump there and pump the water over every 3 or 4 months or something. And some years later we went over there, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, I can't remember what, but we went over to see what had happened, and we couldn't find it. We were walking through the bush and it had disappeared, because all you saw was, well, you could see buildings and things. It was a great big wall of steel, rusty steel.
It had just turned over completely.
It had gone up and it was standing right up on its side. I am very disappointed to think that it has got to where it is. We'd gone to the work to get it level, and we told them what to do, that they had to pump the water in to keep it level. It may have been the school we told, I'm not sure, but whoever it was, they had the information as to how to keep it.
Right.
It could have been kept safe, and then people could have gone on it and actually had a look. And
Scottsdale High School at one stage was offered it for nothing.
Wow.
Was that from Perth Parkway, was it?
Well, I don't know who it was from, but they said that we could you know, use it as a tourist attraction, but when you investigated the insurance policy you'd need it.
Does anyone now officially own it?
Well, I think Parks own it.
Parks.
And it should be just a mining treasure, like you can't, not really meant to be pulling stamp batteries down. Or so how it worked, of course, electric, the bucket ladder went up and down, the dredge master sat right up the top there, surveying and of course controlling lots of electric motors, and a lot of them were controlling winches. And so it pulled itself, and we've already seen the cables. There was quite an energetic shore gang that would have to clear all ahead of us. And so it would actually work what we call a paddock, and it would go up and down the face of a certain size, 50, 80 metres wide, and block out paddocks. And it could go forward, backwards. So the ladder, of course, with, I don't know how many it worked, I think it revolved at 31 buckets a minute, I think, went through it. And that they were up the ladder and then onto a revolving trommel. So the trommel, round screen, into there, and there were jets of water washing it, and that was inclined, so the oversized then went out the back. No. And then the undersized, the small stuff went through the trommel, and on board there were jig, what they call jig plants used for processing and concentrating the tin. There were primary jigs up high, and then deep in the bowels, you can probably see where those little holes are down in there with the secondary jigs. And there we get it up to a concentrate of about 40%. So then it had to be brought out of that and put in a rowboat and taken ashore.
Imagine tipping over.
And of course, Jeff would know and have photos of it. Have the photos of the crap house out the back.
Out the back, yeah.
Yeah, it's leaning over the back.
Yeah.
It was yeah, I don't know if it's still sticking there or not.
The giant building was like nothing we'd seen before. It was a mixture of many things: a boat, a factory, a machine, an excavator. It was a bucket dredge. Those huge dredges were designed to extract tin from the soil on a huge scale. We climbed aboard into a whole new, eerie world. It was a hard life for the workers. Dredges, scoop-like buckets gouged out soil from the lagoon's bank. A conveyor lifted overflowing buckets and emptied them into a revolving screen. Water was pumped in. The tailings, or rubbish, fell down the drop chute into the lagoon. The heavier tin was separated and dropped through the screen. It was collected below in the sluicing room. The engine screamed and belched and could be heard for miles around.
There was about 45 people working on it. It was going 3 shifts a day, and there were jobs like, one of the very important jobs I remember was the grease monkeys. So there were huge amounts of things to keep lubricated. And of course the top of the tree was the dredge master, but there were carpenters, electricians, and of course the shore gangs. So it employed quite a lot of people there, just keeping it going.
On one shift there was 45.
Pardon?
One shift had 45.
No, total workforce.
Right.
Yeah.
I came.
All the tree stumps and things, were they dug out by the shore crew, were they?
Well, you jam your bucket ladder pretty well with a stump, and occasionally you got them really jammed in, so they could never go through the plant, so you'd have to watch your vegetation. Yeah, so a lot of clearing, and I guess they had dozers towards the end.
They used to winch a lot with the winches on.
Yeah, so other winches would lift things around and pull things about. But
And there's that, but there's a
how big was
photograph
the cable?
of the
oh, we just saw some of
No,
it.
for the power.
in there.
For the power, like, it must have been a pretty thick cable, the power cable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can't actually tell you what the dimensions.
There's a photograph of it somewhere.
Yeah,
the
of the
cable.
cable.
Would have been pretty big.
I haven't. There are a lot of more summaries with all the. This document here actually tells you all the dredge houses and the complexes and everything defined. The bow crane on the front, a 20-ton crane operated by the mooring winches arranged over the bottom tumbler. So there was a 20-ton one that was lifted up and down. Electrical. Ship's transformer is mounted on the main deck and provides 6,600 volts, 415 volts for motors and 250 volts. Rather, total stored horsepower is 600, maximum demand is 450. So unit consumption of electricity is close to 1 kilowatt hour per cubic yard of dirt dredged. So there's a huge amount of statistics you can get out of all this if you keep analysing.
This dredge was working down the bottom of the road. You could hear the noise from Gladstone, clanking and growling and going on. And apparently one of the biggest problems they had, as you say, the tin's down on the bottom, and this is basically used to be a huge lake, and a lot of dead trees and tree stumps in the bottom of this lake. When the buckets hooked onto one of those tree stumps or one of those trees that had fallen down, it had pulled the dredge over, which had changed all the angles on their tables, so all the tin would go to get washed out because the angle of the tables was pretty critical in terms of capturing tin.
That wasn't a problem here because it had jig plants.
That's
what jigs
was that over
on the old ones and built out of timber around the turn of the century. They had sluice boxes, and they did exactly that. Yeah, you'd tilt the sluice box over and it would scour and take the tin out. So those old ones, that's probably one of the main reasons that they failed. But this one with modern, much more modern.
But he did say they had problems. The bloke we were talking to here said they had problems with it because it used to tilt. Whether it was just getting tilting.
Yeah, well, you might still lose something, but it should be a lot less. They had a lot of problems here losing fine tin.
Yeah.
That's another thing. A lot of it was indicated, but they weren't getting it. It was going out the back, fine tin.
So it's still down there.
Yeah.
Was this ever viable here?
Well, it only just break even here, but as I said, it made lots of profits except for 1 year back at early days. But
Nothing but a good power, Bill.
yes. It helped upgrade the whole system out to here to Gladstone, and always had fairly it pulled a lot of power. And that's why the power lines go straight down the street, Chaffey Street, to the far end to come across the river. And it's all three-phase.
That was taken about where we are now quite a few years ago. Yeah. That was before it tilted over. And it was a ship, actually, wasn't it? It was registered as a ship.
Really? From where we are now?
Well, basically, where the way it's facing now, yeah. The buckets actually, if you go around the other side, you can see the buckets on the other side of that pontoon, the ones that were under the surface.